You either retire a hero or serve long enough to see yourself become the villain. That may be a slight butchering of the original quote from The Dark Knight, but its meaning is nonetheless brought home with the recent renewal of Bob Iger as CEO of the Walt Disney Company, or as I like to call it, the Bob Iger Company, because that's what it is now. As we will see, everything Walt created a century ago was put to pasture under Iger. However, what I find interesting is the reaction to this most recent renewal. When Iger first returned as Disney CEO after Chapek's brief reign, which Iger sabotaged every way he could, the industry collectively celebrated with glee, and the establishment pundits were like,
I am so happy right now I may actually cry. Bob Chapek has been fired by Disney. He's out. Bob Iger, Big Papa Iger, is back, running the company again, at least for a little while.
By contrast, ourselves and most of our peers in this corner of the internet were quite clear that Iger's return was bad news for Disney, because despite Chapek being scapegoated, Big Papa Iger was the true architect of all of Disney's problems. And obviously, it was we that turned out to be right. Because apart from a few select outliers, there's no establishment celebration now. This time, many more recognize just how big trouble Disney is in, and that the cause behind that trouble is none other than Bob Iger himself. Not only that, the returned Iger isn't Big Papa Iger, but an Iger desperate to salvage his legacy by cleaning up the mess he made as Big Papa Iger, favorite son of the industry. Now that he has 2 more years to do it, will Iger be capable of cleaning up the mess he created in the first place? Time will tell on that, but in the meantime, I will begin this editorial with a brief summary of what Iger has done to Disney, the details of his renewal, and what he must do in order to save the company he destroyed. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer famously said, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. For the perfect case in point, look no further than to Disney. When fans and pundits like our peers and ourselves maintained that The Last Jedi had ruined Star Wars and signaled larger woke trouble for Disney as a whole, both the establishment media complex as well as independent outlets still high on pixie dust ridiculed any and all naysayers. At one point, naysayers were even dismissed as rotten bots. Remember that? For all that ridicule though, Star Wars is now, years later, universally recognized as a broken brand. For the next stage, when we said Marvel were headed down the same path, along with the rest of Disney, the assorted pixie dusters got aggressive in their defense, because in their book, Marvel and Disney were doing amazing. Yet now, years later, the very same voices and outlets which said all that, suddenly and also casually write about how not only Marvel has lost its way, but how Disney at large really is in big trouble. It's self-evident now. It wasn't always though. Still, many of us saw where things were headed. So let's summarize how Bob Iger ruined Disney and the entirely predictable ways in which he did. Under Iger, all of Walt Disney's own brands, the ones that actually built the company and formed its identity, were effectively sidelined in favor of new acquisitions. The classic Disney animation became Pixar 2.0 as John Lasseter managed both, while Marvel brought in the boys' appeal that Disney lacked. And to be clear, for a great many years, both of these acquisitions were successful, very successful in Marvel's case. And if Iger had retired when they still were success stories, he would have gone down in history as the best CEO since Disney himself. truly having expanded the company. But Iger stayed on, and not only did he invest way too much in China, he continued his acquisition strategy, which diluted the soul of Disney for what we now know was way too long. He acquired Lucasfilm, he acquired BAMTech, that would go on to code Disney+. And on that note, he spent more than he had on all of those other acquisitions combined when he acquired the entire entertainment division from Fox, which he did in order to provide content for Disney+. You see, Iger intended to win the streaming wars, which was to be a big part of his legacy, Disney+. He pretty much states that in his book Ride of a Lifetime. But in acquiring Fox to build Disney+, Big Papa Bobby Iger had overextended himself on Disney's behalf. You see, we now know Disney Plus has flopped. It is seeing stagnant to negative growth, depending on location. It has been overtaken by Max, which means that not only was billions upon billions wasted in content creation for the service, but it also means that the justification for acquiring all of Fox in the first place is called into question. Worse yet, that very acquisition of Fox, and Fox's share in Hulu with it, set Disney in a position where they, come the beginning of next year, have to buy out Universal's remaining stake in Hulu as well at market price. That's going to be a hitherto unknown amount in the double-digit billions. Something Disney could have shrugged off if the Fox acquisition had paid off, but it hasn't, quite the contrary. Now, that upcoming Hulu cost is a major problem. On top of that, with reference to our earlier coverage of ESG and stakeholder capitalism, which I highly recommend you watch if you haven't done so already, as that is a vital piece of the puzzle here. The credit lines needed to pay the Fox acquisition put Disney at the mercy of BlackRock and other equally zealous institutional lenders, who forced Disney even deeper into the ESG racket, filling the company with even more ideopolitical zealots than Iger already had done of his own accord. And he did that, presumably in order to facilitate his once-planned run for president for the Democratic Party. But whether installed by Iger for his own political ambitions, or because Disney's ESG-linked creditors demanded it as payment for the Fox loans, these new ideologically driven employees began changing the company and its content in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, thereby making all of Disney's output increasingly exclusionary and detrimental to Disney's traditional and built-in family audience. When Iger fired the aforementioned Pixar guy John Lasseter over a Me Too witch hunt, both Pixar and Disney Animation were taken over by creatively compromised ideologues. When Iger got rid of Marvel's checks and balances guy Ike Perlmutter, the same thing started happening there, while Lucasfilm never had a chance, because Kennedy was always an ideologue. Under Bob Iger's watch, all of Disney's content gradually became ideopolitical propaganda. It took years for everyone to catch on, and some still haven't. But families across the world are increasingly realizing that Disney is no longer for them, and so they are abandoning everything Disney, even the parks. That's why Disney is struggling now. That's why all their movies are bombing. That's why Disney parks see less and less visitors, while everyone else sees more and more. In the name of inclusion and trying to change the world for the better, Bob Iger excluded and chased Disney's built-in audience, the family audience, away from Disney. All of Disney's current problems stem from that wide-scale audience and customer rejection. To put it bluntly, Disney Heiner-shited themselves and pulled a Bud Light. But just like when the Titanic hit the iceberg, the ship is so big, it took a while before anyone noticed the initially slow, but gradually ever more noticeable sinking. Now, that sinking can no longer be denied, and it is against this backdrop that Iger has been renewed once again. Deadline Hollywood's July 12th story, Bob Iger to keep running Disney until 2026, originally supposed to exit in 2024, reads, and note how little they celebrate Iger this time. Notorious for sidelining a series of successors over the decades and unretiring multiple times, Iger seemed, to many observers, unlikely to anoint a new chief in 2024 and step aside as prescribed by his agreement. When he was pressed on the topic in recent months, the executive said he had actively taken part in a succession committee's efforts to land on the right leader for Disney's longer-term future. At a Wall Street conference last March, he said succession was at the top of the list of his priorities. That's bullshit. Iger never wanted to leave. The top of his priority is to be renewed again and again forever. But beyond that, Iger should have no say over who eventually replaces him, because he's going to want a mini-me, an Iger 2.0 to continue his vision, and that is obviously the last thing Disney needs right now. The article continues, although there was briefly a sense of euphoria in Burbank and on Wall Street as Iger first returned, the CEO sequel hasn't unspooled smoothly. The executive has confronted a slowdown in the theme parks unit, a run of theatrical movie disappointments, accelerating pay TV declines, and a soft advertising market. Another worry is negotiating a fair deal with Comcast for its 33% stake in Hulu, which will cost Disney at least $9 billion to retain. As the headaches have mounted, the company's once high-flying stock has drifted down to about half of its level in early 2021.
Dang it, Bob!
While most media shares have been hurt by the larger economy and industry flux of late, Disney's slide has been more conspicuous, given that it is a Dow component and an outsized symbol of entertainment and leisure. Note that there's no more blaming JPEG here. They did that for way too long and way too much, and for things that were Iger's fault. To it, the article concludes. There seems to be no apparent heir to Iger, at least not yet. And in my book, that right there is their problem. They are looking for someone to permanently take over Iger's mess, but as of now, no one suited for the job wants it. And why would they? Just look at what JPEG got for trying to clean that up, namely dealing with Iger's time bombs like the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit, or plots orchestrated by Iger's minions like that whole Don't Say Gay debacle, which directly led to the conflict in Florida that Iger since made so much worse, which is no longer JPEG's problem, as he got fired for no outwardly justifiable reason. They obviously have a hard time finding a suitable, permanent CEO for this sinking ship, and in my book, they shouldn't even look for someone permanent, not the way things currently are. So, what should they do? Before we move on with what Iger needs to do now that he has been renewed, I'd like to take a moment to talk about what I think Disney Sports should have done here if they had any ambition, foresight, or shareholder interest at heart. Iger should have been replaced not by a permanent CEO, but by an interim CEO. And this needed to be an outside hatchet man, someone with no ties to Hollywood or anyone or anything in Disney, someone who isn't worried about an awkward meeting with someone he fired at a cocktail party. Hell, they should get in someone from abroad if need be, someone who could pull an Elon Musk and mercilessly fire everyone that stood between Disney and the family audience, and who would have no qualms about canning any and all projects without mass audience appeal, no matter how far along in development, and who would publicly reject ESG in all its forms and have the courage to stand up to the investors pushing for it and deal with the fallout. And then, after this interim CEO had done the dirty work, which would mean he'd never have the institutional goodwill to run the company afterwards, then and only then could a new permanent CEO be assigned to continue the rebuilding of Disney, preferably in a vision more like Walt's and less like Iger's. But again, that's all wishful thinking in my end. So, back to reality. To be fair, Iger has done some very good, very uplifting and very important high-profile firings already, like Chief of Diversity Latondra Newton and Victoria Alonso, to name a few. And he must continue to do so, because if Disney is to have a chance of recovery, Iger has to be the kind of hatchet man I thought only an outsider could be. All the Disney executives and their acolytes, who not only allowed the company to veer this far off course, but who helped push it there, have to go. Every last one of them. The firings done so far were a good start, but if Iger is to prevent this Titanic from sinking, he has many, many more firings left to do. In a sense, what Iger has to do is backtrack, undo his own hirings, and roll back the damage those hires have done to the company.
Drive your ship to the other ship. And I would say even drive it backwards. You don't want to go too fast because you're damaged.
That's the one good thing I will grant about Iger being renewed. With this vote of board confidence, he has the power to carry out more firings that previously would have been thought unthinkable, but which will be vital for a Disney recovery. And there you have it. No cheering crowds awaits the king on this return, because this time, Bob is no longer Big Papa Iger. He is trying to salvage his legacy by cleaning up the mess he made as Big Papa Iger, and Hollywood is none too pleased with what that means he must do. So, do you think Bob Iger can be the all-out hatchet man he needs to be to bring Disney back from the brink? Or is he himself too intrinsically linked to everything wrong with Disney that he is incapable of fixing the company? Let me know in the comments.